8th grade math, test 20, part B. Sorry I got cut off in the last video there. We were on relation 2 for problem number 12. And problem number 12, relation 2, if we look at the table, we see that none of our x's repeat. So if none of, oh, actually, that's not true. One of our x's do repeat. I see that I have -5, -2, and -5, 0. So if the x's repeat, that's not a function. So let's take a look at 3. Same thing. I'm looking at the table for relation 3, and I'm seeing that one of my x's repeat. X's repeat. It's no function. Take a look at relation 4, and for relation 4, I see that we have a graph. And if I do the vertical line test, I don't hit any points more than 1, so that is a function. So my answer is 1 and 4 are functions. Problem number 13, we're going to write an equation. Now, if we look at that table there, if these inputs, these x's are in order, and this is linear, I can see the equation just by looking at it. So I see that it's going down by, it looks like it's going down by 1 every time, so my slope is -1. And I see that when my x is 0, my y is 10, so my y-intercept, or my b, is 10. So my equation is y equals -1x plus 10. Remember, slope goes in front of x. The b is the constant. And then I simplify. -1x is just -x. Problem number 14. If I look at the graph for 14, I see that we have a table, a graph, and I can see that the line hits way up here at +5, so that's going to be my y-intercept. And I see that if I go from one point to another on this, if I go, let's say, from here all the way down to this point right there, which is on a lattice, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's -5 over 1, 2, 3. So that's a slope of -5/3, so I can just write the equation by putting the slope in front of x, and y-intercept as the constant. 15, we're going to look at the graph again. 15. So this one, I purposefully am not giving you any points so that you can't, do all the calculating, use algebra. You have to understand y-intercept and slope in order to answer this. But the good news is, if you understand it, there's no work to do here. I can see that my y-intercept is down here at negative, and it looks like it's less than half. So right away, I know the answer can't be B. And I know that it's a positive slope. So right away, I know that my answer has to be D. Or C. But it's a steep slope, right? A slope of 45 degrees, we learned in class, is 1. A slope of 1. Rise 1, run 1. So if it's steeper than that, it's going to be steeper than 1. The answer has to be D for 15. All right. So looking at 16, we're missing a leg for that right triangle. So I use a Pythagorean theorem. I go a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And of course, I don't have to use b. I can use x. I square those two. So the next thing you guys do is you go 15 times 15, which you memorized in class. That's 225. And we also memorized 25 squared is 625. I have to isolate the variables, so I subtract this from both sides so that I get it. So it just says x squared equals a number. When I take the square root of both sides, I see that 400 is a perfect square. Now, if I take a look at this, I see that this is actually a 345 because 3 times 5 is 15, and 5 times 5 is 15, so that had to be 4 times 5, or 20. It's another way to do it if you notice there's a 3, 4, 5. So we take a look at 17. So problem number 17, again, we have a right triangle for 17, and it says this. We're going to find x. It's a right triangle, so I'm going to go leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. And 2 times 2 is 4, and 2.2 times 2.2 is 4.84. Add those two together. And when I take the square root of that, that's not a perfect square, so that's just it right there. We don't have to estimate that, giving an exact answer. So, let's see, next problem. After 17, we're on 18, and 18 says you have a right triangle, and one side is rad 70, and another side is rad 45. So there's two possibilities here. So the longer side, rad 70, that could either be a leg. That's one possibility. Or it could possibly be the hypotenuse. So let's look at both possibilities. What if rad 70 was a leg? If it was a leg and we were missing the hypotenuse, this would be our equation. I have two irrational numbers. I'm going to square them. They become rational like that. I don't do 45 times 45 because of that square root. I just do 45. I add these two. I take the square root. If that's not a perfect square, I give an exact answer in a rational number. Okay. Now, the other possibility, possibility 2, is that rad 70 is the hypotenuse. So that would look like this. That means I'm missing a leg. Again, simplify those two, isolate the variable, take the square root. This time it happens to be a perfect square, so the two possibilities are the missing side could be 5, or the square root of 115. 19, we have a ramp, which is just a right triangle, right? If this is 17, then this is 17 also. We're missing a leg for this Pythagorean theorem problem. So I go leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. Again, we memorized 15 squared. We got to go 17 times 17. You should get 289. Subtract to isolate the variable. Take the square root of both sides, and if it's a perfect square, we'll simplify that to 8. And the last one, number 20. We have 2 points on a graph. We're going to find the distance between those 2 points. We can't just count them because it's diagonal. So what you can do is you can draw a right triangle and do Pythagorean theorem. Or, that's one of our options, right? You can draw a right triangle and do Pythagorean theorem. Or you can just, and this is going to be the same answer, just use the distance formula, right? Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, which means we end up taking the square root on the last step. Or we can just cut to the chase and say a is going to be, well, just subtract your x's. B is going to be subtract your y's. Simplify that. Square those two. 3 times 3 is 9. Negative 4 times negative 4. Whoops. Let me see here. Okay, so if I do add the opposite right here, that's going to give me the 3 over here. If I do add the opposite right here, that's going to give me the negative 4 in case you missed that. And that's where I get negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16, right? Negative times negative is positive. Then I add these two to get 25, take the square root. The distance between those two is 5. All right, hope the video has helped.